Yes, okay. So hi, welcome back everyone. So we're just continuing on in this series where we are talking with professors about their experiences around reference letters. This is reference letter season, and I have the pleasure of introducing two of my colleagues in the human biology program, Dr. Maria Papaconstantinou and Dr. Alistair Diaz, who have a lot of experience and get a lot of requests for reference letters. So thank you to both of you for joining us. And I'm wondering if I could ask you, right now, you must be getting a lot of emails. Are you able to answer all emails like within a few hours, a few days? What is your experience? And if I could start with Dr. Diaz.
Yeah, so on average, at least in the last, I would say, month or so leading up to this heavy or this sort of busy season for reference letters, I've been getting, I would say, anywhere from 2 to 3 emails a day regarding reference requests. And you may not think that's a big number, but they add up over time. And I think I try my best. In some cases, if I have the chance, I will try to respond to a student right away if I can. And to be honest, sometimes it really depends on the email and how it's structured to me. In some cases, the email I get is very uninformative where I don't have enough knowledge of the student to be able to say anything. So I have to email them back and request a whole bunch of information. So in those cases, sometimes they don't get a response from me for a few days just because I have to put in the time to ask them the question back. Other times it's actually very detailed and I can easily say yes or no and they'll get an immediate response. So I think that answer is very dependent on the content of the email and how it's framed.
I agree with Dr. Diaz. It all depends on the email itself and how informative the email is. But normally I usually get back within 24 to 48 hours at the most, especially now in September when classes have started. But I have received a lot of requests for reference letters. So again, it depends on how informative the email is. I might have to email the student back and ask for additional information. Sometimes they email to ask for a reference letter, and I'm not sure how many, they're not specific as how many reference letters they need. I'm applying to, for example, medical school. That's very vague. Can you provide me with a reference letter? Well, how many medical schools are you applying to? How many programs? How many reference letters do I have to provide? So that's all relevant information, and that will help me determine whether or not I can provide the reference letter or ERS, and how many, or not, how many I can provide.
I was also wondering on that topic, if you could share a little bit about how long does it actually take to write a reference letter for things like medical school or for graduate school. I think that some students have the opinion that it might take just 10 or 15 minutes to fill something in for them and that it shouldn't be too much hassle. Insights into that? And if we could start with Dr. Papaconstantinou.
I would say on average, it takes about an hour
Wow.
to write a reference letter. So depending on how many graduate schools or programs they're applying to, each reference letter for me is tailored to a particular program. And many of these programs require you to fill out a assessment form. So they require a letter of reference, but they also require you completing a particular form where you may be comparing students to, their class cohort, et cetera, providing additional information that you may not have provided or may not have provided specifically in your letter of reference. So I would say on average, it takes about an hour, sometimes longer, but it takes about an hour.
Wow. And is that the same experience for you, Dr. Diaz? About an hour?
Yeah, a great example now is actually the OMSAS for medical school. That system actually completely changed recently. Before, where I sort of had a framework for these letters, now they ask very specific questions needing very specific examples. So in those cases, a lot of students aren't aware that reference system has changed and they think it's just whip up a reference letter really quickly. But really now I need a lot more information to come up with some of these specific examples. So now I've been asking students to actually come up with some of these examples themselves to help me formulate those letters. And I think that's something that students need to keep in mind.
Oh, again, really insightful. And I think touching base on one of the topics that you had mentioned before, do you ever say no to someone who has taken a course with you, whether it's been like too long since you've had them as a student or you just don't know them very well? Is there something that triggers like a response that is in the negative?
Yeah, so let me reiterate. My first inclination is always to try and say yes. I don't really want to say no. But yes, so at certain times, one, if my request pile is just way too big and I have too many due on a certain date, what I usually will tell the student is I cannot do it for a certain date, but if your reference letter is due further down the line for another program, I may be able to help out there. I have said no on a couple occasions due to marks. In some cases, when I look through the students' marks, they're just, to be honest, not up to par with, maybe applying to medical school or applying to the program they're applying to, or it's just, I will not be able to put together a very positive letter for the student based on the performance in the course. And in that case, I think it's actually better for the student that they ask for a reference request from somebody else that maybe they perform better in that particular course.
Very similar with Dr. Diaz. It depends on when I might have many requests to fulfill for a particular deadline, and especially if the request came in a little late. So like a week or so, or even sometimes 2 weeks before the deadline. If I already have so many to complete by that deadline, I might not have the time. That's one scenario. I mean, the second scenario, if I can, and just like Dr. Diaz said, if I can't provide a strong reference letter based on their academic performance in the class, I will say no, because it is really to the detriment of the student to provide one that is, just very ambiguous, not very strong whatsoever. So I would, usually advise them to ask another professor in which maybe, they had a stronger performance in another course. Another also example is when I have a student, so he or she might be applying to, or they might be applying to, we'll say a graduate program or what have you, or even medical school. And I had them in a very large course or maybe a second year course. And now they're in fourth year, third year, well, usually they're in fourth year at that point. If it was a course where if it's a large course, I didn't really get to know them very well on a more personal basis, then I most likely will say no. So for example, HMB 265, there's in the fall course, there's about 1,000 students. If I have and I normally serve as coordinator, sometimes as instructor, but it's becomes very difficult to get to know somebody on a personal level. I always advise students to ask professors from their third year or fourth year courses, because in those courses, they tend to be very small or much smaller, I would say, than second year courses, and the profs would have gotten to know them at a more personal level.
Okay, so amazing insight from both of you. I know that we wanted to maybe touch on emails. Maybe we'll leave that for another day. But bringing up that topic that you had just mentioned, Dr. Papaconstantino, I'm just wondering, in the online environment, it's a real challenge for students to get to know their professors, even in small seminar courses. Do you have any suggestions for your students?
Sure. I mean, even in the online environment, I do have office hours. I would say attend the office hours many times. They're usually by request now, but I have days and times blocked off just for office hours for students. So a great way to get to know your prof is through office hours. And I agree, it has to be done virtually, just like we're just speaking right now. However, I can still see you, you can still see me, even if we're not in person at this point. So you still there are opportunities for you to get to know your professor, even if it's an online environment. So office hours, great way to get to know your prof.
Okay, some great insight. And Dr. Diaz, do you have any advice for students who want to get to know their profs a little bit better, or even their classmates in the online environment?
Yeah, I would certainly reiterate what Dr. Papaconstantino just said. I mean, I think office hours, even when I was doing in-person classes, one of the things I always encourage from the classes, just to come up to me and say hi and introduce themselves. Sometimes the very first thing you'll get is a question about content without even getting a hello or a greeting from a student. And I think it's really important to introduce yourself, say hi. And, we don't always have to talk about the course or content from the course. I'm more than happy to talk about, other things going on. Sports is a big, very connecting topic, the weather, whatever it might be. I'm open to those sort of conversations. And now I think even more so with everything going online, I think it's really important to attend virtual office hours and get to know your prof a little bit. Get that face-to-face interaction as much as you can. And believe me, you may think these interactions don't stand out, but when that reference email comes, those couple interactions that I've had with you or those extra conversations I had with you help me connect your email to you. And that, may make a difference in, getting a positive reference letter versus just a general, really ambiguous reference letter. So I think it's really important for students to keep that in mind.
Go from here. Okay, so we're back with Professor Liza Bolton, who is in the Statistical Sciences Department here at the University of Toronto. We are asking her the same questions that I've asked my colleagues online as well. If I could ask, do you have any advice for students who are asking and emailing you for reference letters? How should they go about doing so?
Yeah, it's a really good question. My best advice is probably also, unfortunately, too late advice for the current reference letter season, but I hope might be helpful for other students thinking, or if they have a little bit of time. So my first piece of advice is make sure I know you. Be the loud one in my office hour, come hang out, ask questions, be engaged in class. If it's open to you and you're comfortable, try to come on mic or use your camera in class. That's not hard criteria for me because I know that's not accessible for everyone, but I'm a human, and knowing you as a human makes it a lot easier for me to be able to later write a reference for you. Then at this point in a letter, please, if you're requesting a reference, please tell me the following things. Include your transcript, include a link to a personal website if you have one, attach any of the sort of things that you've written already for applications, and be really clear about what your deadlines and dates are. I'll often have students sort of just generally ask, and I won't necessarily know for when, whether it's for this session or for a later date, whether it's international or things like that. So even if I haven't said yes yet, if you can give me all of those details up front, and you can copy and paste a lot of it for your other profs, that really helps me with my decision making. And lets me just be like, oh yeah, no, I do remember them from class. And oh yeah, there's their website where they were working on that project that they told me about. Oh yeah, I can totally write about that for them. So.
Okay, so we're on the very important topic right now of reference letters. We're joined here by my good friend and colleague, Dr. Jessica Pressey, who's an assistant professor in cell and systems biology. And I thought I'd ask her a few questions related to reference letters and student requests for reference letters. So thanks for joining us again here today. And I was wondering, do you get a lot of requests for reference letters? And how do students contact you for these reference letters?
I do get a lot of requests, actually. They're often in the form of an email. And originally, when I first started back in January, I was getting a lot of students who I had been interacting with in office hours, so I expected a request from them. But over the summer, with COVID-19, I started getting a lot of requests from students that I didn't know very well. So if I don't recognize the email address or the name right away, it's usually useful if the student reminds me where I would know them from and whether or not we've met in person before or on a virtual setting before. I really appreciate that. Since I do get so many requests, keeping everyone's name straight when I don't always have a face to go with it can be a challenge for me, certainly.
So I also wanted to ask you a few questions related to misconceptions students might have about reference letters. So if they send you a request, are you always going to be saying yes to that request?
I think that if a student that I don't know very well is making a request to me, then I think that I want to try to help them as best as I can, even if I don't know them. This means that they might get more of a generic type reference letter from me, but if that's all that they actually need for their application, I'm happy to provide that. But if they want a really strong reference letter, I definitely appreciate them making an effort to make sure that I know who they are in advance.
Okay, so that's great that you're able to do all of that. I was also wondering, often students have like more than one request, so they might request a reference letter for different graduate programs, or in addition to graduate programs, like reference letters for professional schools. Are they the same type of letter that you're writing for them?
No, often when I have my meeting with you for your reference letter, I'll be asking about the type of things that they're requesting in the specific application. So for a reference letter for graduate school, they often want me to make suggestions or recommendations based on the potential that you have in research. Whereas for a medical school or a dentistry, they want completely different information on you. So it's not the same reference letter. So if you want multiple reference letters, I need to know from the get-go, and I also need to know when they're due so that I can plan my time appropriately.